Well, Cathy Bennett's revelation this week that she's been the target of online bullying, sexual innuendo, and threats of violence has thrown the spotlight on how women in the public are treated. But it's not just politicians who felt unfairly targeted because of their gender. The women's advocate at the FFAW says she's been subjected to cyberbullying too. And Dwan Street joins me now, along with NDP MHA Jerry Rogers and Liberal Lisa Dempster. Thank you all very much for being here.
Oh, it's great to be here.
I want to start off with you, all of you, to react to this. But first, Lisa, what was your reaction to what Cathy Bennett had to say this week?
A couple of things, Debbie. First of all, I want to say I'm immensely proud of my colleague and our entire caucuses for the courage in coming out. And as you alluded to in your opening, I guess in public life we sign up and we often get a little bit more than we bargained for, especially in this technological age. But having attended Cathy's press conference, it was sobering and actually shocking to me to read the level of some of the emails that she had received, you know.
Jerry?
Well, I think it was very courageous for her to do this, but none of it is surprising because we hear about this all the time. And I think what's really important is that we as women take our place. We simply have to not be intimidated, but that we take our place, we make our spaces, we make sure that we don't allow anyone to silence us.
And Dwan, your viewpoint of what the minister had to say.
I mean, just to echo Jerry and Lisa here, just to say how immensely proud that I am that Minister Bennett spoke out on this very important topic, and that she helped open up that conversation, that dialogue again. You know, it's always disappointing that we need to be having this type of conversation, that you'd think that we're beyond this, but you know, opening this conversation, being able to empower women to step forward and to tackle this issue head on. I actually can't express how proud I am of her that she took the initiative to do that.
What has been your personal experience? Have you been subjected yourselves to online bullying or unwanted comments that you think are totally unfair? Jerry?
Well, I haven't received a whole lot of online attacks, and funnily enough, I believe one of the hardest aspects of my work is directly in the House of Assembly, where we see an incredible level of bullying, of attempts by others trying to silence.
And is it gender related, do you think?
I believe the way that I may be treated in the House is somewhat different than the way men might be treated in the House. And I also believe that oftentimes men react differently in a number of ways in the House. And it's a way to silence, and that's what bullying is about. It's trying to silence, trying to make sure someone's voice isn't heard, and we see that in the House. I think there's been an attempt, particularly in this session, with the Speaker, to try and do something about the decorum in the House. But it's so odd. So often, people who sit in the gallery will then say, "How can you stand it? How can you stand going in there?" And journalists see it as well, and it's the oddest thing because nowhere else is acceptable in any other workplace what we see in the House of Assembly.
Well, I'm just wondering, I want to go to Dwan because you're in a different workplace, you're in a male-dominated workplace like you politicians, and you have received your own type of abusive reaction. Just what's been your experience?
Well, as you know, Debbie, I mean, right now we're in a very politically charged climate as well. We do have another group who's trying to raid our union, and that's Ryan Cleary and Fish NL. And we did have one of their members come to a meeting with the sole purpose to disrupt and threaten us in that meeting. It resulted in physical violence, verbal threats, death threats, and the fallout after that meeting itself and the feedback that started coming in wasn't targeted towards my male colleague. It was more so towards myself to say, you know, well, if she can't take the heat, maybe she needs to get out of the kitchen. And it's this mentality that, you know, that kind of snowballs. From there, I've been accused of only getting my job because of looks. Then, you know, my credibility and my qualifications get questioned. And when I wanted to be a member of FFAW and work for FFAW, which I have for such a long time, I was willing to accept, you know, that I might have to work a little bit harder to move ahead in a male-dominated industry. But what I didn't expect, and what I certainly didn't hope would happen, is that there would be a constant challenge on my credibility and my qualifications because I'm a female in that industry.
Lisa, what has been your experience in the House? And just briefly, have you experienced direct online bullying?
I have. I think in anybody right now who signs up in public life and in this social media age, you're going to be subject to some of that. And to pick up on Dewan's point, there seems to be a double standard between male and female. Men maybe get judged on their ideologies or their stances on certain things. Women tend to get judged on their appearances and things like that, so it's very unfair. But Cathy started an important conversation, and one of the things that really struck me was it's about talking about what's acceptable language and what's not acceptable. And one of the things that she mentioned in her press conference, and I put it back to my own experience going through some difficult times recently with Muskrat Falls and things like that as a Labrador MHA. Sometimes somebody will post a very nasty post, and you'll look at it and consider the person, but it's the people that like it that can really hurt. I never thought those 25 people would like that. So this conversation is so important today, because I think if we're going to change this, like, you know, this quote that says our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. And I think I personally would like to get the message out. Are we condoning that by liking or even by not speaking up?
Cathy Bennett did say that women, when they are being trashed online, as some men are as well, it's different, the language that's sent to women. It's sexual innuendo. Does that make it more difficult for women?
I think it does, and I think that's why it's so important. I've been a documentary filmmaker for 30 years, and the work that I have been doing is about giving women voice. And I think what's really important is that we look at ways of particularly young women really using social media in a powerful way, in a way that empowers women, and looking at how do we make sure that women are at the table, and not just to mimic the traditional sort of male approach of doing things, but how do we make sure that everybody's voice is at the table so that we really make a difference? How do we make sure that, Zarin Healy-White is doing great stuff online. There's a lot of women doing fabulous stuff in social media, empowering one another, having fabulous conversations. We need to be able to do that. I think that's what we need to be able to do and focus on.
I think Cathy Bennett alluded, well, she spoke to this, that quite often the degradation of women has just been pushed under the rug. I'm getting a sense from you three, you're not prepared to let that happen anymore. Are you encouraged that there might be a shift in the works, Dwan?
Absolutely, and you know, I think one of the solutions we need to look at here is that people need to be held accountable for these actions. And like you said, Lisa, I mean, it's the people that like these posts that kind of start to pump people up a little bit and get them a bit braver. And we see it every day, you know, when people are using Trumpisms. One thing that we've seen, you know, to fire up angry people and make them angrier, and that's when we see the death threats and the threats of violence being lobbed at us. So, you know, when people are held accountable for these actions, and I always go back to something that former CAW President Ken Loenza said. He spoke of a scenario where he was in a room and men started speaking negatively about a woman, and it kind of started to snowball, and he spoke up and said, hey guys, you know, we're better than that. And immediately the tone in the room changed. Because there was that voice of dissent. And then the conversation changes a bit, you know, when people start to realize that maybe this behavior isn't acceptable. Maybe somebody's going to look at me negatively because this is how I think, and I'm not going to be supported, and I'm going to be the outlier.
Dwan, we're going to have to leave it there. Some fabulous points. Thank you very much for joining me for this discussion.
Thank you for the
Thanks so
opportunity
much.
to talk about this important topic.
Thanks, Debbie.